Welcome to the podcast summary of Wade's Causeway. Today's story is one of those archaeological puzzles that gets more interesting the longer you look at it. Wade's Causeway on the North York moors was long treated as a Roman road, but that tidy label has really come apart, and now the argument stretches from prehistory all the way into the medieval period. What survives is impressive, but limited. And once you get into the details, the big questions pile up fast. How old is it? How far did it actually go? What was it for? And why does a giant named Wade keep showing up in the story? For a long time, the standard view was pretty straightforward. Wade's Causeway was classed as a Roman military road, probably built around AD 80 during Agricola's campaigns against the Brigantes. That interpretation still has some appeal, because the surviving structure does look road-like, and in places it looks Roman road-like in particular. But archaeologists in this century have pushed back hard on the idea that the case is settled. By 2013, English Heritage was reporting that opinion had shifted toward a prehistoric origin. And that is a big shift, because prehistoric here is not a narrow window. People have proposed Iron Age, Bronze Age, even Neolithic dates, while others still leave room for a medieval structure. The reason the date range gets so wild is that the site just will not cooperate. There are no coins, no clean datable artifacts, and no radiometric evidence that pins the construction down. So the possible build date stays astonishingly broad, from about 4500 BC all the way to the late medieval period. Archaeology usually likes to narrow things down a little more than that. The unmistakable bit is on Wheeldale Moor, and it is only about 1.2 miles or 1.9 kilometers long. That surviving section is a raised, cambered embankment, roughly 4 to 7 meters wide, with loosely fitted sandstone flags and drainage features that make sense for crossing wet, badly drained ground. It is practical, sturdy, and clearly engineered for the landscape. You can see why earlier researchers looked at it and thought, yes, that feels like a serious route across the moor. At the same time, it does not neatly match every expectation for a Roman road. It seems to lack a substantial foundation of large stones, and there is no clearly established link tying it into the wider Roman road network. Even the old argument that Romans always built ruler-straight roads does not really save us here. Wade's Causeway has short bends and pivots, and those were once treated as anti-Roman clues, but Roman roads like the Causeway and the Stanigate show that Roman engineers could be flexible when the terrain called for it. So the shape of the monument keeps giving mixed signals. Romanish in some ways, awkwardly unlike a textbook Roman road in others. Then there's the question of extent, and this is where the map starts to wobble. Depending on whose reconstruction you follow, the full line of the causeway runs anywhere from the surviving 1.2 miles to something like 25 miles, around 40 kilometers. The most defensible northern extension reaches Leesrig. Beyond that, claims that it carried on to Whitby, Dunsley Bay, Sandsend, Goldsboro, or Guisborough are really conjectural, and often lean on antiquarian reports rather than solid surviving evidence. The southern end is no cleaner. People have suggested links to Cawthorne Roman Camp, to Malton, even to York, but 20th century surveys found no definite traces beyond Cawthorne. Later maps preserve several competing routes, which is useful in one sense, because it shows how persistent the question has been. It is less useful if what you wanted was one clear answer. One of the more interesting ideas is that we may be asking the wrong single question. Instead of trying to decide whether Wade's Causeway was a road or not a road, some archaeologists have considered whether it changed function over time. Its unusual physical features have prompted the suggestion that it may originally have been a Neolithic or Bronze Age boundary dike, later collapsed, heavily robbed for stone, and then reused as a trackway. That would help explain one especially odd detail. Burial cysts protrude through the surface by as much as 0.4 meters. That is a very strange thing to find in a functioning road, if the road and burials belong to the same phase. A layered history makes more sense of that. A prehistoric boundary, then a later route, then perhaps a medieval road or wool trade track using what was already there. And that is part of what makes this site so slippery. Even if later people used it as a road, that still would not tell us what it was built to be in the first place. The local tradition is much more decisive than the archaeology, which is honestly very on brand for folklore. In the story, the monument was built by the giant Wade, so his enormous wife could take a cow to market or out to pasture. The alternative names are great too. Old Wife's Trod and Wade's Wife's Causeway. Those names give the monument a lived-in, remembered quality, even if they do not give us a construction date. Some scholars have wondered whether the legend preserves an old memory of the site, maybe even pre-Renaissance or earlier. But the name Wade is also tied to a much wider Germanic and Norse heroic figure, appearing as Wade, Wada, Vathi, and related forms. So the folklore tells us the monument mattered enough to be woven into story, but it does not prove that some historical Wade built it. Sadly, giant infrastructure records are patchy. Even place name evidence only gets you so far. A local name like Skivik or Skivik may reflect Norse settlement after the 9th century, but the term Skith could have been applied any time from the 9th to the 15th century, which is much too broad to settle the dating argument. Whatever its origin, the monument has taken a beating. Over time, it has been damaged by stone robbing, plowing, tree felling, utility works, erosion, and even tracked and armored vehicles. Its stones were reused by local builders for roads, walls, dikes, and farm buildings, which is a very practical human habit, and a terrible one. If you are hoping to preserve archaeological context, it gained legal protection in 1913 after early excavators cleared and exposed the Wheeldale section. But that exposure also made it more vulnerable to weathering, grazing, and visitor wear. That history helps explain why modern heritage managers have become more cautious. Instead of assuming that more digging will magically solve everything, the current preference leans toward careful monitoring and remote sensing work, including aerial survey and proposed LIDAR. In a case this ambiguous, protecting what remains and gathering better landscape data may be smarter than chasing one dramatic excavation in the hope that the moor suddenly gives up all its secrets. So Wade's Causeway remains one of those rare monuments that gets more uncertain as scholarship gets better. We know it was significant, skillfully made, and reused or reinterpreted across time. We just still can't say, with confidence, who first built it or exactly why. And honestly, that unresolved quality is part of the appeal. Some sites hand you a neat label. This one keeps the conversation going. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.